let's start with Whitman to Cage. What I'm going to do is call randomly around, and all I want you to do is sort of draw a line from the very beginning of Mod Po, because what we said was that the Dickinsonian mode is really going to dominate, or at least overtly dominate, through Chapter 2 up to Chapter 8, particularly, but that in Chapter 9, Whitman's importance comes back. And I guess I want to really just get out on the table some basic points about how you get from Whitman to 9.2. So, Amaris, you're on the spot. Whitman to 9.2. Try it.
I guess the first thing that occurs to me is the idea of taking language from the streets, drawing from the everyday, sort of Whitman's long, exuberant prose gets sort of translated into reductions.
Good. Inclusiveness and an unwilling to make discriminations and discernments and open to all. Emily Harnett, anything else from Whitman to 9.2?
Yeah, you know, if you see Whitman as trying to contain everything, as having like a sort of all-encompassing poetics, then, you know, our aleatory poetry, which has a sort of broader criteria of selection, you know, to some extent no criteria of selection, follows in that tradition.
Very good. Erica, Whitman to the contemporary?
I also think that what we get from Whitman is a reminder that language is active and can act, and we see that continuing to come back.
Great. Max, Whitman?
Just to go back to what I said earlier, it starts with this suppression of the ego in the individual, right? It's a collective poetics. It wants to get away from one poet speaking for others and instead try to channel a kind of group expression or collective expression.
Great. Eric, Whitman? Whitman in the contemporary?
Well, I think Ezra Pound talked about Whitman clearing the ground. And if you look at the poetry around the world, at the kinds of freedoms that poets have been discovering and continue to discover, it's a freedom that often acknowledges Whitman as its godfather and as its sacred ghost.
Terrific. Dave, Whitman in this stuff?
Just brings me back to thinking in Leaves of Grass how it started a lot with I, and in that sense you look at it and say, oh, this is egotistical, but then he's talking about I am the ground beneath your boots. He's at the same time completely deconstructing, diluting, and offering the ego out to everyone.
Yeah. Julia?
I think Whitman and Cage are in different ways also acknowledging that there's an idea about the self being dispersed. It's not just about challenging notions about the singular self. It's about creating a poetry that can acknowledge the way in which selfhood is shared and collaborative and dispersed already.
Great. And I'll just add, Lily, do you want to do some Whitman?
I was on the phone, so I missed the question.
Yeah. How do we get what's Whitmanian about the contemporary stuff we're dealing with?
Well, I apologize if somebody said this already, but I think this idea of being more like a cipher than a filter, if that makes sense, like collecting the noises and the things and the perspectives and things around you rather than put it, well, I mean, Whitman certainly interpreted and put his own spin on things, like would never, but if you think about sections of that, of Song of Myself, like Blab of the Pave, or this impulse to collect everything that's in the world as much as possible, then there's a similar impulse with Cage, or even like our later, I think 9.3 poets who are more interested in transcription and recorded sound.
That's really brilliant, and all these points are great, and I hope that people who want to get back to Whitman will feel instructed by all this. But let's just pick up on Lily's point before we go to the phone caller. And you know, Whitman was working out the whole problem of the poetic ego so early, and it is just this problem that someone like McClough and Cage and certainly Joan Rotalick, and the 9.3 poets, someone like Goldsmith. Goldsmith is a very Whitmanian ego. One almost want to say egomaniac. Certainly Walt Whitman was an egomaniac, but he was the kind of ego who wanted to be utterly selfless in the way he collected things. So he had the presumption, what I assume you shall assume is the presumption, and yet, as Lily said, he wants a non-curated reception of the world. He doesn't want to discern, to discriminate, and that there's a political and ethical import to non-discrimination. He does not want to discriminate between one thing and another, and it becomes indiscriminate, which is generally culturally a bad word, but non-discriminatory, which is politically and ethically a positive word.